This is the third candidate in our police chief recruitment, Michael Carroll. He comes to us from Alameda County. Did I say that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so, Mr. Carroll, we're going to just go through a series of questions for you. We have 12, and we have 45 minutes to get through all of them in. So we'll want to make sure that we budget time accordingly, and I'll kind of keep you on cue if we're running out of time. I should probably introduce myself first. I'm Shelby Fritz. I'm the moderator today. I think we've themselves, and then we're just going to go in order of the panel asking questions. So sure. Marianne will get us kicked off. So I'll have everybody introduce themselves and we'll jump right in.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Marianne Claybaugh, and I work a non-commissioned position for the department in the finance office.
Nice to meet you, Mary.
You too.
Good morning, I'm CP Taylor, and I'm one of the assistant chiefs with the Tacoma Police Department, and I head up the investigative bureau.
Nice to meet you.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Woods. I'm the director of our Office of Equity and Human Rights.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Tanisha Jumper. I'm the director of media and communications, which also encompasses strategy and engagement.
Nice to meet you.
Good morning, I'm Allison Griffith. I serve as the assistant director for our neighborhood and community services department.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. Question number one. We've all had the opportunity to review your resume. From your perspective, how does your background and your experience prepare you to be the chief of police of Tacoma?
Okay. Preparation to be a chief started when I became a father. And the reason I say that is because raising children, you use the same skills to lead an agency. You want to support them, you want to invest in them, and you want them to go out and be prosperous. So I have two daughters. The youngest one is in NYU in a master's program. The oldest one is an attorney in DC. So I was successful at that. And so I feel like I use the same concept as a leader in the law enforcement agency in which I work. I worked 26 years in Alameda County, which is in Northern California, made it to the rank of captain. Prior to becoming a law enforcement officer, I received a BA from the University of California at Berkeley in political science. I took on a challenge that the community that I grew up in refused to take, and that was to become a police officer. I grew up in what they call an inner city, and today we call it a marginalized community. And we had a very, very polarized relationship with law enforcement. There was a lot of mistrust back then, and it still is today. But I wanted to take on a challenge to see if I can be the change agent to help bridge that gap between law enforcement and the community. So I became a deputy with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. And when I became a deputy, I realized the power that you have as a police officer and the ability you have to impact people in a positive way. And so as I continued as a deputy and promoted up to the rank of sergeant, I saw the influence, the spirit influence that I had not only on the agency, but in the community. As an investigative sergeant, I worked in our crime prevention unit. I also worked as a robbery investigator. One of the major accomplishments that I had was I had a 53% robbery solvability rate. That was very special to me because the state average was 23%. I promoted up to the rank of lieutenant, and I realized that we had a problem in our system. Actually, this was at the time when I was a sergeant. I realized we had a problem in the system where we have young people making bad choices that's leading to felony-like arrests and creating backgrounds for them that many of them won't overcome. And so I decided to create a program called the Santa Rita Jail Youth Education Program. It's an early intervention, but it's designed so that young people can see incarceration before they actually get sentenced to incarceration and hopefully curb that negative behavior. Then I promoted to the rank of lieutenant, and the sheriff hand selected me to start up a unit called the Youth and Family Services Bureau. And it was a division, a secondary patrol division. And we had to be very creative in regards to how do we institute and operationalize community policing while providing police services. So we had a traditional way of patrolling, and then now we have this new way of patrolling called community capital policing. That's investing in the community. As law enforcement officers, we tend to focus on the crime itself, right? But what I want to do is I want to look under, I call it the iceberg theory. I want to look underneath the iceberg to see what causes that iceberg. Underneath that underneath that waterline is where you see the criminogenic factors, the things that impact the community that make us unsafe. And those are things like homelessness, theft, drug use, drug abuse, mental illness, all of those things that we have to address as police officers. And let's address those issues in a collaborative way where we bring in the behavioral health therapists. And we had a component where we had 6 behavioral health therapists who actually worked with the officers when we dealt with people with mental illness. We had a home, we call it houselessness in the Bay Area, but we had a homeless advocate who actually worked with us to help provide, identify solutions. These tools were embraced by the agency, and these are things that we started to implement to help reduce crime, build partnerships with the relationship, and making our community safe. As I promoted to the rank of captain, I was assigned to one of our detention and correction facilities out of 117 employees, and I have 450 some odd inmates. But I created a new concept called therapeutic living communities. Therapeutic living communities shifted the way we rehabilitate those who are incarcerated. We provided them with the resources they needed in order to be successful as they enter into the community and so that they don't recidivate. We also introduced them to cognitive behavioral therapy that helped them realize the consequences of their actions and how it impacts not only them, but others. The program went really well, but one of the beauties of it is it reduced the use of force that we had in our division by 35%. Officers were coming to work excited because now they had a purpose. They saw a new way of doing things. I operated very inclusively where everyone had a voice, from the lieutenants, sergeants, deputies, all the way down to the explorers that work for our facility. And that's how I lead in a very inclusive way. The detention facility actually was decommissioned by the sheriff due to a number of budgetary concerns. And once he decommissioned it, he actually assigned me to our Emergency Services Bureau. And there I worked with other agencies to develop what is called Next Generation 911. That's a new dispatch program that we're incorporating so that we can move away from an analog system to more of a cloud-based system. Along the way, there was a number of platforms that I created. One is called the Barbershop Forum. The Barbershop Forum is a safe space for the community, law enforcement, local politicians, and other community stakeholders can come and have a safe, transparent conversation to address issues and concerns. Initially, it started off in a very contentious relationship. It was very difficult, a lot of hostility, a lot of cries for defunding the police, but it was also, over time, we developed some healthy relationships, partnerships, collaborations, and I would even say family. One of the biggest successes is that the DA, district attorney, was involved in the Barbershop Forum and its concept. She embraced those who are considered, they call them returning citizens, but they're actually known as formerly incarcerated. People who have been incarcerated 10, 20, 30, 40, and one guy's even 50 years. She embraced them and created a whole job description for them, and they're called community impact coaches. So they work with her when individuals are making bad choices who she thinks she can save by using their tools. The other success was in the 4 years that we were actually facilitating the barbershop forums, and we're still doing barbershop forums, we were able to galvanize and motivate and inspire 37 people from marginalized communities to become law enforcement officers, and they're law enforcement officers in the San Francisco Bay Area. You say, why a barbershop? In communities of color, the barbershop is a therapeutic center for African-American men. That's where we go and make gossip, right? But for the most part, we share information. And if the barbers are spewing out negative information, the community is getting negative information. So we wanted to create a safe space where we could talk about use of force. We could talk about de-escalation. We can talk about I forgot the name of it, but we could talk about different functions of law enforcement, community-oriented policing is what I was going to say. And so as I incorporate these values and these platforms, and it was received well by many. And so then we had an incident called George Floyd. It was very tragic, impacted the community in a number of ways. So I created something called cultural humility. It's actually cultural diversity with the introduction to cultural humility, so we can all learn about each other. This is where African Americans, Hispanics, whites, transgender, LGBTQ, we can all have an open, transparent conversation, because the more we learn about each other, the more we are aware of each other, the more we appreciate each other. So using those concepts, I realized that this is the future of what law enforcement should look like. The community is really supportive. Currently have a platform called CPR, Conversations to Provide Resolutions. Since we can no longer meet in person for a barbershop forum, we've transitioned to a Zoom-based platform where we're having these conversations. And now it's just not people within Alameda County. We have people all over the world. I think we have 4 people from Thailand and Hong Kong. The barbershop forum has regained so much notoriety. We were nominated for an Emmy. We received an award from the NAACP nationally, and NOBLE, which is National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Agencies. We received a national award for them. And we've been asked to do the program in Baltimore, Alaska, and I want to say Jackson, Mississippi. We've facilitated it in Fresno, all throughout Alameda County, and I just recently returned from Chicago, hosting a barbershop forum. So I think with those attributes, that's what make me a good candidate for the chief of police.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Washington State Legislature was very proactive this year in session, and they really enacted sweeping reforms in policing. 2 House bills in particular that went into effect in July. House Bill 1310, which establishes permissible use of force, and House Bill 1054, which establishes tactics and equipment requirements. And so what we'd like to know is, can you give us your take on both of those House bills and whether or not you feel that they have any challenges and all the benefits to those?
Yes. So the use of force, 1310, that initiative we're currently doing. We've passed it in California. We've been operating with that bill for quite some time now, and it's about use of force. The other one is in regards to equipment, militarized equipment, and officers having access to militarized equipment. Officers have to be able to do their job. We're dealing with some extremely violent individuals in our community, and you want to make sure that your officers have the right weaponry in order to do the job. And some of the weaponry, though it may be militarized, is much needed. You have individuals now with AK-47s that can actually shoot through a vehicle. Only thing that's going to stop it is this engine block. You have officers out in the community that's putting their lives on the line, and I want them to feel safe. I want them to know that they have the right equipment, the right tools in order to get the job done. Because what we don't want is we don't want to have a casualty of an officer that is just trying to protect us. Oftentimes we see the militarized equipment. Yeah, it looks egregious, but it's needed in certain aspects. Okay. In regards to 1310, I'm not sure if it's the interpretation or the way the bill is actually written, but it's some confusion amongst the law enforcement personnel. And I think it needs to be vetted out a little clearer so that officers know what they can and cannot do, because it appears to be taken on a hands-off approach, and that's not going to help with public safety. And so either the legislators, local government has to do a better job at the wording and give some clarity around how it's going to be implemented, because I noticed that there is a lot of confusion around 1310. 1310 also talks about de-escalation, and de-escalation is important because we have to de-escalate. We have to incorporate that into the way we operate so that we can diffuse situations before they take on a whole new life. Also, you have demands for 8 can't wait. There's certain aspects of 8 can't wait that is legitimate. You know, some of it is far-fetched. Giving warning shots, that's not a appropriate thing to do. I agree that the chokehold is something that we can do away with. We have equipment now that we no longer have to utilize the chokehold, and there's other things that we can do unless it's a life-threatening situation. So a lot of the initiatives have already been implemented in the state of California. It just takes some time to acquiesce towards them. So thank you for that.
Please explain your ability to work with and establish relationships with a wide range of diverse stakeholders and communities, as well as strategic partners, officials, colleagues, and the media.
Okay. One example of creating a platform for a diverse group as the barbershop forum. As I explained to you, it's open to everyone, and that includes the law enforcement officials, that includes politicians. All community stakeholders are welcome to the barbershop forum. We have Spanish speakers, we have interpreters, we have community activists. If you're part of the community, you're invited to the barbershop forum, right? And I've experienced people have their perceptions have shifted just by building these relationships, having these opportunities, having this safe space to have conversations. Initially, we weren't sure, it was a crapshoot. We weren't sure if it was going to actually be effective, but it has been effective in such a way that San Francisco Chief Bill Scott recently called me and wants to do a barbershop forum in his community because he sees it as a valuable way of bridging that gap between law enforcement and the community, because it helps us identify sustainable ways to ensure public safety. So that's just one aspect of it. Another aspect is just during COVID, we've had a number of concerns surrounding COVID and how to mitigate the issues surrounding COVID. And so we've had community forums to talk about the best practices on how to stave off COVID within our communities. So bringing politicians to the forefront to address some of the initiatives that's taking place in Alameda County, bringing some of the department heads together to talk about the initiatives and sharing that information. So I believe in working in a collaboration so that everyone can have a seat at the table and have their input and have their voices heard. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Describe a situation where you had to work closely with elected representatives who were upset about policing issues. How did you manage communication with them, the city manager, and other affected parties?
Okay. Shortly after George Floyd incident, I was hand selected by a board of supervisor by the name of Nate Miley. And he wanted to construct an initiative to address social injustice and police reform. He wanted to bring together community stakeholders, community-based organization representatives, community activists, governmental officials, and law enforcement. I was one of 2 law enforcement officers involved in this initiative. It gave me an opportunity to showcase and share the great work that officers are doing to address some of the public's concern. A lot of times we tend to speculate what an officer's job is. We don't really know the role. So my input was valuable because it gave the community a different perspective. You know, oftentimes we cry that officers didn't have to shoot someone. We didn't have to shoot to kill. And officers don't shoot to kill, we shoot to stop the threat. And community members don't understand that. During this opportunity, I met one of the pastors who had a lot of frustration about law enforcement and disdain for law enforcement. And he truly believed that officers were out to shoot to kill. I also met the University of California, Berkeley's head basketball coach, and he had similar feelings. So I brought them out to take part in what is called a force option simulator training, so that they can go through some scenarios so that they can see what officers are faced with on a regular basis. And going through that training, they had some experiences that shifted their mindset and their belief and understanding of the role of a law enforcement officer. So sometimes when you have opportunities, such as creating initiatives and you're there at the table, you can actually provide input that shifts people's mindsets. And so that one right there was a very important time of my 26-year career, because it gave me an opportunity to share with the community some of the concerns of law enforcement officers, but also gave me an opportunity to have some input on an initiative that just recently, prior to my retirement, we started in operationalizing some of the components that we had teased out. So that's it.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Tacoma Police Department's civilian staff members are important contributors to the success of the department. How do you encourage and engage civilian staff members, and how do you balance their needs with those of the commission staff?
Yes. And I'm glad you asked that question because my last assignment was working in our emergency services division, and that encompasses our warrants, records, dispatch, and crime analysts, and they're civilian staff. And I truly believe the civilian staff is the heartbeat of your agency. You need them much more, I wouldn't say much more than you need police officers, but they do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. I truly value them. The opportunity to work with them in this particular division really gave me a greater appreciation for them. Oftentimes they're overlooked. And at the time that I worked there, I spoke to them about wages. And when we had this conversation about wages and salaries, I saw what they were making, and I wanted to advocate for them for a raise because, like I said, they're doing some of the heavy lifting, a lot of the heavy lifting for the agency. So that is some a classification that I truly appreciate, and they're doing remarkable work. They behind the scenes don't get a lot of recognition, but they're doing a lot of amazing work. And I wanted to make it a point to acknowledge them for the work that they were doing. So I continuously either put them up for accommodations or created opportunities for them to be recognized. At the time of COVID, everyone was concerned about the officers, but who's concerned about the dispatchers, warrants and records representatives? So what I did was I creatively created, look, I've only been gone 6 months and I forgot the name already. It's T-shirt Tuesdays or no, Essential Wednesdays. So I created a T-shirt that said, "I am essential," and it had a dispatcher logo. And every Wednesday, instead of fully dressing, everyone wore their jeans and their T-shirt just to acknowledge that I appreciate you. And so let's get out of our uniforms and let's wear T-shirts in honor of the great work that you're doing. So I appreciate that classification of staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to chime in here and let you know we've got 7 questions left and about 22 minutes.
Oh yeah, we're good.
Okay.
All right, for you personally, what have been fulfilling and satisfying aspects about policing in the community, and how would you envision this in Tacoma?
That's a question that I can almost get choked up behind, because the work that I've done over the past 26 years, I would have never thought as a young man this would be me. I went to University of California at Berkeley, and I stood in a protest that said, "F the police." I had a great disdain for law enforcement. I've been illegally searched. I've been detained. So I never thought I would become a police officer. So 26 years later, to know that I can pick up my phone and I have over 20 formerly incarcerated people's telephone numbers because I built relationships with them. To know that I can walk in the community and people will recognize me with all 5 fingers is a plus for me. To know that the work that I've done has created national models is fulfilling to me, right? And so to know that working in collaboration with others to create so many successful platforms and concepts to help law enforcement as a profession, that's very rewarding to me. And all of that I've done over the past 26 years is extremely transferable to any community. It doesn't necessarily have to be Alameda County, Oakland, Hayward. It's transferable here because policing is policing. The problems you have here at Tacoma, we experience in Oakland, San Leandro, Hayward. So it's not that these problems don't exist elsewhere. They exist elsewhere, but I found a few mechanisms that can actually help us address those issues. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great lead into this next question.
Uh-oh.
What are some specific strategies that you have used or would use in order to attract more people of color and women into law enforcement in either both commissioned or civilian capacities?
And that's important because I saw that Tacoma has a problem, especially with recruiting African-American men. I think they only, women, they only had 4 African-American women. The concept that I would use is called communication. The more you know about me, the more you understand, and the more you support me. The more individuals found out about law enforcement and what our true role is, more people gravitate towards us, right? It wasn't that we held a barbershop forum and 37 people decided to become cops. They got to know us. They got to build relationships. They got to see how they could impact their community in a positive way, right? And once they saw that it's a possibility, they said, I want to do that. Right? I did a program in high school because really young people have a great disdain for law enforcement, but we don't recognize it that much until you start talking to these young kids. They don't care for cops, right? So our SROs were receiving a bad rap in the community. So what I decided to do is whenever a teacher in the San Lorenzo Unified School District took time off, was running late for work, I inserted one of my SROs to do a program called Talk with a Cop. And Talk with a Cop was 45 minutes that a cop can address the class about issues, or sorry, about the profession, why they became a cop, some of the things they've experienced, and the great thing about being a police officer. Talk with a Cop led to us creating, or we had an Explorer program, but it contributed to us expanding our Explorer program, because now kids start seeing cops that they knew and they could relate to and said, hey, I want to be part of that. We went from 20 to 140 Explorers just by putting Talk with a Cop into the school system. And now some of those same Explorers are now deputies. They're dispatchers, technicians. One young lady in particular, she started off as an Explorer and she lived in our marginalized community, 7 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. She became a deputy. And now she just bought a home in Antioch, a 5-bedroom home where all 7 people are staying with her. So just imagine if you can transform your whole family from a marginalized or underserved, disinvested community. Now you're living in the suburbs and, you know, relatively safe. So those are strategies that we can actually implement.
This next question is a little bit longer, so I'll read it slowly.
Sure.
The city of Tacoma is beginning an in-depth transformation to become a truly anti-racist organization. Tell us about a time when you led a major transformation or change effort for an organization. What were some of the challenges you faced and what were some of the successes?
It's a really good question. Shortly after George Floyd, and I think I explained this a little bit, but you know, I met with the community and wanted to try to figure out where do we go from here? He said, Mike, there's no connectivity between law enforcement and the community. I know we have meetings, but it seems as though the rest of the law enforcement has no connection with us. I said, you're right. Let's figure out a way to do it. So I created the Cultural Humility course, right? Cultural Humility course gave people opportunity to learn about each other. You know, whether you're transgender, African American, Hispanic, you come in and you do a cultural share. Reason I did this is because we need to understand that we're more alike than different. And there's aspects of the community that we don't have in law enforcement, right? Prime example, the transgender community. Let's go out and build a relationship, understand the transgender community so we could appreciate them and understand that they're human too. So using the cultural humility as an example, where we had to deal with some issues surrounding differences, that was really successful. Like I said, now I've taught that through Alameda County Sheriff's Office, the entire Fremont Police Department, the Emeryville Police Department, working with BART, which is our Bay Area Rapid Transit, teaching the course, in contract with the San Francisco Sheriff's Department to not only teach their entire staff, now they also want me to teach some of the inmates about cultural humility and hopefully that can resolve a lot of our problems. Because the most difficult thing to talk about in today's time is race. Can't talk to you about race because you're gonna feel some type of way, and I'm gonna feel as though you don't understand me. We have an issue in America, not only race, but something called microaggressions. And so as we understand how our microaggressions lead to implicit, explicit, complicit bias, and if we start utilizing tools like procedural justice, restorative justice, and address our implicit biases, we start doing things a little bit different. So that's it.
Just one quick follow-up. What were some of the challenges that you faced in rolling out that training?
Denial. People are denying that, no matter what nationality you are, you're denying that I have biases. We all have biases. Denying that you see things from a racist lens, whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, you're in denial. A lot of pushback, because you know why? People think that that course or that addressing diversity, addressing biases, you're going to bring out the Black-white binary, and it's not the Black-white binary. It's more or less having a conversation to show our similarities. So it was challenging because people felt as though it was going to be finger pointing, and people weren't receptive to it. The undersheriff, who had been in law enforcement 41 years, stood up in the middle of the course and said, "This is the best course I've had in 41 years because it addressed his privilege." Okay, so.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
So please tell us about your experience working with other department heads or colleagues on city council goals or objectives. What were the outcomes?
If I'm hearing you correctly, you said working with other departmental
Other
heads.
departments in the city, so other, like us, people that work in other parts of the city, working with them on city council goals. and
Yes.
objectives.
An example would be, I don't know if I mentioned to you guys about community capital policing. Did I mention that to you?
Briefly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an example of working with various departments. You know, we have to work with our housing department, Oakland Housing Authority. We have to work with city council. And so I mentioned community capital policing, right?
Mhm.
I want to pivot. So we have a detention facility, and people get released from the detention facility, and sometimes they have nowhere to go. So we worked with the Oakland Housing Authority, Oakland City Council, the Board of Supervisors, the District Attorney's Office. And what we created was we identified a property in the city of Oakland, an apartment complex. And we worked with the collaborative units to create safe housing for, initially started with women, so that they can have a safe place to go and do what is called family reunification and address their issues along the way, right? Eventually it expanded and it became a female and male housing division. And this has been award winning. It's pretty much the future of reentry. And it involves everyone. It's just not from a law enforcement perspective, but you had social services, you had human resources, because you want to make sure that these individuals are identify some sustainable employment. You had different workforce investment boards and what have you. So it was a collaborative approach on reentry for those who are formerly incarcerated. And if we no longer can rely on law enforcement just to be the sole entity for public safety, it has to be a collaborative approach. And I welcome that, because I want to see things from different lenses. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Many in the community believe that implicit bias is present in current police officers and practices. Do you believe this is true? Please explain why or why not.
I believe it's true because implicit bias is involved in everyone, right? Everyone has bias, right? There's something called implicit bias, but there's also complicit bias and explicit bias. These biases, depending on how you address them, can be very hurtful. Implicit bias is when you create stereotypes about an individual and you move. Your majority of the times you may be right when you have a stereotype about a person, but a small percentage of the time you can be wrong. Implicit bias. But then the explicit bias, that's when you overtly say something that's offensive to someone or believe something is offensive just based off of that person in their race, nationality, or sexual identity. And then you have complicit. Complicit is when you see something, but you don't say something, you're just as culpable. So yeah, it is problematic. And so that's why the cultural humility course is so important, because we not only the law enforcement officers, but everyone needs to understand how our biases are impacting others, right? Can you tell me a time where there's a training where law enforcement and community train together? There's not any. But in cultural humility, that cultural humility course requires law enforcement and community members to work together. So yeah, it is an issue, and it's not only in law enforcement, it's in society. There's something else called microaggressions, and those are when people make slighted comments. You think it's a compliment, but it's actually it's an insult. So.
Thank you. Okay, in light of the national protests against them, police officers are experiencing an all-time low in morale and job satisfaction. How do you intend to address this in a way that restores pride in the workforce while still ensuring community concerns are addressed?
Law enforcement, there's hills and valleys. You're gonna be lovely, you're gonna be welcome, you're gonna be well received. 9/11 was one of those moments. Then there's a lot of valleys when you have George Floyd, Oscar Grant, Rodney King, and all of those things. But you have to weather the storm. Morale takes a hit. Right now, the community's mistrust, the community's rally cry for defunding, those things impact morale. Recruitment impacts morale, vacancies and what have you impacts morale. Mandatory overtime impacts morale. So you have to reward the officers and acknowledge the officers for what they do. These guys are putting guys and women are putting their lives on the line during a pandemic. They're coming to work every day. They're showing up, making sure you're safe, making sure the community is safe. They're doing a heck of a job. It's a noble profession. And oftentimes we forget that these guys, they show up. I don't care what happened. You're gonna run out of here. If this building fall apart and people are hurt, you're running out. Guess who's gonna be here? Mike Carroll. I'm gonna be here making sure that everybody's safe. And that's what those guys do on a regular basis. So we need to reward them and acknowledge them for the work that they're doing. When you work somewhere that's fun, you don't mind coming to work. So we gotta bring excitement back to the job. We gotta go back and revisit, why did we become police officers? So there's a barometer that you have to use. Go back to measure, where were you at when you first became a police officer? What was your purpose? I became a police officer because I want to serve the public. Let's reinstill that word servitude. And so now let's just go back to why you became a cop, and let's get back to that point, get back to that barometer. So acknowledging, rewarding, giving them platforms where they can actually openly express themselves without fear of retaliation, and seeing what their values and views are. And as a chief, implementing values that are consistent with the work that we're doing. So. And then also the final thing is identifying what resources, tools, equipment they need in order to do their job efficiently and ensure that they have that. Okay, so that's it. How are we looking on time?
You're doing great.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
7 minutes to go.
Okay.
And we're coming up on the finish line.
No, we're coming up on lunch.
Is there any additional information you'd like to share with us regarding your experience or qualifications or questions for us for that matter?
The one question I would have for you guys is think about, what kind of chief do you want? I mean, you have a lot of people using these buzzwords. Oh, time for transformation, time for innovation, time for change, right? But ask yourself, what do you want in your police chief, right? Do you want the same old thing? Or do you really, truly want something new, something different? Getting something new, something different is going to be challenging, but rewarding at the end, right? I'm an innovative, courageous, I am transformative, progressive leader. I stand up for my people, but I stand up for the community. I believe that we can work this out. I think we can make some advancements, but it's not just going to take Mike Carroll. It's going to take all of you and all of Tacoma to make these changes. That's all I have. So.
I have a follow-up question
Sure.
to that. So you are very much a doer, very much a person that gets in there. And I guess my question is, how do you transition from being the person day-to-day doing
Yes.
and to the person who's directing? And
Right.
can you talk a little bit about how you think you'll make that transition? And
Yes. And that's an excellent question because I get asked that all the time. So a lot of the work you'll see as you move up the leadership change, you have the idea, but the staff do the work, right? And unfortunately, you do get the credit, but it's really staff work, right? And so for me, it's just getting you to see the one, identifying expectations, right? And then two, being inclusive, right? And for example, the jail that I ran, the detention facility that I ran, it became a covenant space for people. Everyone wanted to go there. When I first got there, no one wanted to be there. I had a lot of issues that I had to address. People weren't being held accountable. And then once we trimmed the fat, once we ironed out some differences, it became the place that everyone wanted to come to, because I reach out to everyone. You're at the table and I'll ask you what, for your input. And when you have ownership, then you're more open to being involved because you have a voice. And so that's what I do. I'll open up and make it real inclusive for everyone. I think I told you guys before, the lieutenant all the way to the explorer has a voice and has a say in what we do. So just being very transparent. That's with the staff, that's with the community, that's with the various unions. And hopefully we can get buy-in that way. Well, I know we'll get buy-in that way. And I've been successful in the past using that same philosophy. So,
yeah, thank you.
sure. Any other questions?
Not a question, just a response to your question of what kind of chief do we want. And I would say, I want a chief that a year from now, our community is going to be proud of the decision that's being made right now, and a chief that's going to be able to have our community trust and be excited about the city of Tacoma. And how you get there is engaging with all of the community members and hearing them and being able to take the hard questions and listen to the solutions that they're bringing. But that's the kind of chief that I'm looking for. A year from now, our community is going to say, we're glad that this is our chief.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great outlook because that's what I see. I seek out is to be that chief. So. Any other questions?
Any final thoughts from you that you'd like to share with the group?
I think that I really enjoy this process. It could have been real simple, a couple of interviews and they make a decision, but just having the community, having the various aspects of the community involved in this process is huge. So everybody has input. I truly appreciate the time that they allot, because oftentimes when I mention certain things, I don't have enough time to go into detail and you're just left with the title itself. So this concept, this process have really given me an opportunity to really vet out all the things that I've been able to accomplish over my career and things that I expect to implement when I become a chief here. And so I just appreciate that opportunity. So that's it.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Thanks very
you.
much for
Show it in the lunch that you provide.
the lunch will be fantastic. Yes, I promise.
I'm just joking with you.
So thanks again. And
Sure.
thanks to the panel for their questions. We have one more candidate for you this morning. Feels like it should be afternoon already. But first we're going to take a 15-minute break and we'll return with our final candidate. Thanks so much.